Dr. Lauren Carter stepped into the airport terminal, her tall and graceful presence immediately catching the attention of a few onlookers. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit paired with a crisp white blouse, she exuded professionalism and authority. In her hand was a small silver suitcase, gliding effortlessly along with her confident strides. Lauren was accustomed to being the center of attention wherever she went, but she never let it distract her from her purpose. Today was a special day. She was on her way to an international education conference where she had been invited as the keynote speaker to present her groundbreaking research on the intersection of public policy and educational opportunities for minority groups. This was not just an opportunity to solidify her reputation, but also to inspire thousands of educators and researchers around the globe. Lauren approached the first class check in counter, handing over her ticket and identification to the airport staff with a polite smile. "Good morning," she said warmly, her voice confident but approachable. The staff member quickly verified her information and returned her papers with a respectful nod. "Everything is in order, Dr. Carter. Have a wonderful flight." She thanked the agent, retrieved her documents, and proceeded to the security checkpoint. Inwardly, she hoped for a peaceful flight, free of disruption, so she could focus on fine-tuning her presentation. Her mind was already swirling with ideas, carefully crafting the sentences she would deliver and the message she wanted to convey. As Lauren boarded the plane, a flight attendant stood at the entrance, mechanically greeting passengers with a smile. "Welcome aboard. What's your seat number?" the attendant asked, her gaze barely lingering on Lauren as she spoke. Lauren responded with her usual poise, "First class, seat 3A." The flight attendant, Jessica Blake, was a blonde woman in her early 30s with an air of confidence that bordered on aloofness. Uh, Jessica nodded curtly, stepping aside to let Lauren pass. Lauren made her way to her seat by the window, carefully stowing her luggage in the overhead compartment before settling in. She pulled out her tablet and a notebook, ready to finalize the last details of her speech. She hoped for a quiet moment to prepare, but unbeknownst to her, a storm of emotions and conflict was brewing, and it would unfold just a few minutes later. Lauren was focused on jotting down notes when Jessica approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to check your ticket again," Jessica said, her tone polite but laced with a barely concealed skepticism. Lauren was slightly taken aback but maintained her composure. "Of course," she said, reaching into her bag to retrieve her ticket and handing it to Jessica. Jessica scanned the ticket, then looked back at Lauren. A vague expression of discomfort crossed her face. "This is a first-class ticket?" she asked, as though struggling to believe what she was seeing. Lauren smiled softly, refusing to let the doubt in Jessica's voice unsettle her. "Yes, it is. I purchased this ticket weeks ago," she said, her tone calm yet firm. Jessica nodded and returned the ticket, though her eyes lingered on Lauren as if searching for something out of place. "All right, thank you," Jessica said before turning and walking away, her body language betraying a hint of unease. Lauren shook her head slightly and returned to her notebook, trying to brush off the unnecessary distraction. A few minutes later, Lauren noticed Jessica standing near the galley, engaged in hushed conversation with another flight attendant. The occasional glances they cast her way, coupled with their increasingly animated discussion, didn't escape her attention. Lauren let out a quiet sigh. This wasn't the first time she'd faced situations like this. As a successful black woman in academia, she had grown accustomed to navigating skeptical stares and unwarranted scrutiny. Jessica returned, this time with a more assertive demeanor. "Dr. Carter, I need to have a word with you," she said. Lauren looked up, her brow furrowed slightly in confusion, but she nodded, setting her notebook aside and standing up gracefully. Jessica led Lauren toward the galley, a confined space that seemed to amplify the tension in the air. "It seems there's been a mistake with your seat assignment," Jessica said, her voice authoritative and cool. "I'm afraid I'll need to ask you to move to the economy cabin." Lauren felt her chest tighten. She met Jessica's gaze, searching for any indication that this was a misunderstanding. But no, Jessica appeared entirely serious. "Mistake?" Lauren said, her voice steady but tinged with skepticism. "My ticket was purchased and confirmed weeks ago. Perhaps you should double check." Jessica shook her head. I've already checked. It seems this seat isn't a good fit for you. Jessica's tone left no room for doubt about the underlying implication. Lauren took a deep breath, summoning her composure. If this is your decision, she said, her voice measured but laced with meaning, I will comply. She returned to her seat, retrieved her carry-on and personal items, and walked to the economy section, where she was assigned a middle seat between two other passengers. The cramped and uncomfortable surroundings were a stark contrast to the quiet elegance of first class. Lauren stowed her suitcase under the seat in front of her, adjusted her posture, and reopened her notebook. But beneath her calm exterior, a storm of emotions was brewing. She was not someone who allowed injustice to pass without response, and she certainly wasn't about to start now. Lauren settled into her seat in the economy cabin, discomfort creeping in as the cramped space and lack of privacy made themselves apparent. The surrounding noise from other passengers added to her unease, disrupting her ability to focus on her presentation as planned. Yet outwardly, she remained as composed as ever. Lauren had learned to navigate situations like this with grace over the years. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she reached a familiar number, then pressed call. Hello, this is Dr. Lauren Carter, she said, her voice calm but firm. I'm experiencing a serious issue on this flight and need assistance from the corporate office. I'll send you the details shortly. Ending the call, Lauren's gaze shifted to the window, her reflection staring back at her, a woman unwilling to let injustice go unchecked. She had no intention of creating a dramatic scene, but neither would she allow this incident to fade into silence. Meanwhile, back in first class, Jessica Blake resumed her duties, her usual air of confidence seemingly restored. However, beneath her composed exterior, an undercurrent of unease simmered. The occasional glances from passengers, their questioning eyes, and the cold stares of colleagues like Mark Evans, a senior flight attendant, all chipped away at her composure. Mark, a seasoned professional, couldn't ignore Jessica's unusual behavior surrounding the passenger in seat 3A. Spotting her near the galley, he approached with an air of quiet authority. Jessica, what happened with the passenger in seat 3A? He asked, his tone calm but probing. Jessica tried to maintain her composure. She seemed to be in the wrong seat. I was just following protocol, she replied, deliberately avoiding Mark's gaze. Mark raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. She had a valid ticket, didn't she? He pressed, his tone sharpening. Jessica, we can't just move a first-class passenger to economy because something seems off. This kind of decision will backfire. Jessica hesitated, feeling cornered, but she clung to her defense. I just didn't think. She fit the space, she muttered, her voice growing softer. Mark inhaled deeply, shaking his head. Jessica, that was a terrible decision, and I'm afraid the consequences will come sooner than you expect. Jessica froze, feeling the weight of Mark's words. Deep down, she knew he was right, but she wasn't ready to admit the mistake that was quickly unraveling her carefully maintained confidence. Meanwhile, Lauren sat in her cramped economy seat, meticulously jotting down every detail of what had transpired. From the skeptical glance Jessica had given her ticket to the curt tone she used when ordering her to move. Her notes were precise, capturing the nuances of every moment. A younger flight attendant, Emily Harris, approached her with a bottle of water in hand. Ma'am, I just wanted to check and make sure you're all right, Emily said, her voice genuine and full of concern. Lauren offered a faint smile. Thank you, Emily. I'm fine. Just a small misunderstanding, she replied, her tone calm but meaningful. Emily hesitated as if she wanted to say more but held back. If there's anything you need, please let me know, she said before walking away, her worried eyes betraying her unease. Lauren appreciated the gesture and made a mental note of Emily's kindness. A sudden announcement over the intercom interrupted Lauren's thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for choosing our airline. If you require assistance during the flight, please don't hesitate to notify the crew. The captain's voice resonated through the cabin. Lauren remained still, her sharp gaze fixed on the window. She knew that every unjust act triggered a series of events, and the consequences were inevitable. All she had to do was wait for the right moment. In the first-class cabin, Jessica was trying to focus on her tasks, but the murmurs among passengers grew louder. A sharply dressed businessman, likely a frequent flyer, leaned toward another flight attendant. Where's the woman who was sitting in 3A earlier? She seemed legitimate. Why was she moved? He asked, curiosity laced with concern. The attendant fumbled for a response. I'm not entirely sure, sir. There seems to have been a mix-up with her seat assignment. The businessman frowned, shaking his head. That doesn't sound like a mix-up. That sounds deliberate. Jessica overheard the conversation, and the words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She quickly retreated toward the galley, hoping to avoid the passengers' stares. But no amount of physical distance could shield her from the sinking realization that she had made a grave mistake. Lauren sat quietly in economy when her phone vibrated. She glanced down at the screen to see a message. The incident has been confirmed. Appropriate action is being taken. Sliding the phone back into her pocket, she gazed out the window, knowing she didn't need to take further action. The system was already set into motion, and justice was now inevitable. On the other side of the plane, Jessica received a call through the intercom. The captain was requesting her presence in the cockpit immediately to discuss the issue with the first-class passenger. Jessica felt her blood run cold. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain a neutral expression as she made her way toward the cockpit. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Jessica, the captain began, his tone professional but laced with sternness. We've received a formal complaint from corporate regarding Dr. Carter, the passenger in seat 3A. She reported being moved to economy unfairly. I need you to explain this immediately. Jessica stammered, struggling to find the right words. I thought there was a mistake with her seat. I was just following protocol, she said weakly. The captain's expression remained unmoved. Jessica, you need to understand that first-class passengers don't just pay for a seat. They represent the image of our airline. This isn't just a personal error. It's a failure that tarnishes our reputation. I'll be escalating this issue to the highest levels, he said firmly. Jessica felt her composure crumble as the gravity of the captain's words sank in. She realized there was no escaping the repercussions of her actions. Jessica stood in the captain's cabin, her hands gripping the edge of a chair as if to steady herself. The captain's stern gaze bore into her, stripping away the last remnants of the confidence she had been desperately clinging to. The air in the cabin was so tense that Jessica could hear the pounding of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. Jessica, the captain said, his tone calm but laced with authority, I need a clear explanation. Why was Dr. Carter, a legitimate first-class passenger, forced out of her seat? Jessica tried to justify her actions. Sir, I thought there had been some sort of mistake. I wasn't sure if her ticket was truly valid for that seat, and I was just following protocol to address it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The captain shook his head, unimpressed. Jessica, I've reviewed the records. Her ticket is completely valid, and she is one of the airline's priority passengers. Nath, do you realize this is not just a minor mistake? Your actions could have serious repercussions for our airline. Jessica lowered her head, unable to muster a response. It felt as though the weight of the situation was suffocating her. Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, Lauren sat quietly in her seat. Outwardly, her calm demeanor betrayed no signs of anger, but in her mind she was carefully strategizing her next steps. Her phone vibrated again, and she glanced down at a short message from the airline's corporate office. Confirmed. The captain has been directed to address the matter immediately. Further action is underway. Lauren allowed herself a faint, knowing smile. She understood that what would follow would serve as a powerful lesson, not just for Jessica, but for the entire organization. A younger flight attendant, Emily Harris, approached her tentatively. Ma'am, I truly apologize for what happened earlier. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to let me know, Emily said, her tone genuine and remorseful. Lauren met Emily's gaze with warmth. Thank you, Emily. I really appreciate your professionalism. Acts like yours don't go unnoticed, Lauren replied, her tone gentle but imbued with meaning. Emily flushed slightly with emotion, nodded, and walked away. Back in the captain's cabin, Jessica was desperately trying to hold on to any semblance of confidence she had left. Her eyes pleaded with the captain as she spoke, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I I didn't think she fit in with the first class environment, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she could hide the weight of her words. The captain frowned, his expression hardening. Didn't fit in? He repeated, his tone sharp and incredulous. Jessica, what exactly do you mean by that? Jessica faltered, realizing the implications of her statement. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence hung in the air, heavy with the reality of what she had done. Jessica fumbled for words. I don't know. She just didn't look like a first-class passenger, she murmured, her voice barely audible. The captain remained silent for a few seconds, his piercing gaze locking onto Jessica. Jessica, he began, his tone sharp and unforgiving, you've just admitted that your decision was based on personal bias, not on protocol or accurate information. This behavior is unacceptable in the airline industry. You need to understand that passengers don't just pay for a seat. They also represent the reputation of our airline, and you've damaged that reputation in just a matter of minutes. Jessica bowed her head, her hands trembling at her sides. The captain continued, his voice growing colder. I have received direct instructions from the corporate office. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty. Upon landing, you will be required to disembark from this flight. Your actions will be further investigated by upper management. The captain's words struck Jessica like a punch to the stomach. Her face burned with humiliation, yet her entire body felt frozen, weighed down by the enormity of the situation. Yes, sir, Jessica replied, her voice breaking as she struggled to maintain her composure. Jessica exited the captain's cabin, her legs feeling weak and unsteady. As she walked through the first-class cabin, the eyes of the passengers bore into her, filled with judgment and curiosity. The hushed whispers and scrutinizing glances felt like daggers piercing through her already crumbling sense of self-worth. She no longer felt in control of anything. She retreated to the galley, where Mark Evans was waiting for her. His expression was a mix of disappointment and resignation. Jessica, I tried to warn you before, but you didn't listen, he said evenly, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. Jessica didn't respond. She simply lowered her head, avoiding Mark's eyes, and stepped into a quiet corner, desperate to avoid further interaction with passengers or colleagues. In the economy cabin, Lauren glanced at her watch, noting that the plane was beginning its descent. She straightened up in her seat, carefully placing her notebook into her bag, and braced herself for the events to come. Around her, a few passengers were murmuring, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. A middle-aged woman sitting nearby turned to Lauren, her voice low but sympathetic. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. That was completely unfair. Lauren offered her a gentle smile. Thank you. Sometimes situations like this need to be addressed the right way to bring about change, she said, her tone calm but resolute. The intercom crackled to life as the captain announced the plane's imminent landing. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense, particularly in first class, where Jessica stood near the exit, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. As the plane's wheels touched down on the runway, Jessica realized that this flight was more than just a routine trip. It was a turning point in her career. And across the aisle in economy, Lauren knew with quiet certainty that her actions had been justified. Justice, after all, wasn't just about accountability. It was about paving the way for lasting change. The plane landed smoothly on the runway, but the tension inside the cabin remained palpable. Lauren stood up, retrieving her belongings from the overhead compartment and prepared to disembark. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the first-class section, where Jessica stood near the exit, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As passengers began to file out of the plane, the captain stood by the door, offering farewells to each traveler. When Lauren reached him, he inclined his head respectfully. Dr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for what happened on this flight. We will address this matter immediately and ensure you receive a formal response from the airline, he said, his tone both professional and earnest. Lauren gave a gracious smile. Thank you, Captain. I trust the airline will do the right thing, she replied, her gaze briefly landing on Jessica, who stood nearby with her head bowed, unable to meet Lauren's eyes. Once all the passengers had exited the plane, Jessica was instructed to remain behind to meet with a representative from the corporate office who was waiting for her at the airport. She descended the stairs slowly, her legs heavy as if weighed down by lead. At the bottom of the stairs stood a sharply dressed man in a black suit, his expression stern. "Miss Jessica Blake?" he asked, confirming her identity. Jessica nodded meekly. "Yes, that's me," she replied softly. "We're with the airline's corporate office. We've received reports that you violated professional conduct while on duty. Effective immediately, you are suspended from your position until a full investigation is completed," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Jessica opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. She lowered her head, feeling as though her entire world was collapsing around her. On the other side of the airport, Lauren sat in the VIP lounge, where she had been invited to discuss the incident further. A senior airline representative entered, his face a portrait of remorse. "Dr. Carter, first and foremost, we would like to express our deepest apologies for the unacceptable experience you had on today's flight," he began. Lauren nodded. "Thank you for the apology, but I'm not seeking sympathy or excuses. What I want is to ensure that incidents like this never happen to anyone else. The airline needs to take genuine measures to change its organizational culture," she said, her tone calm but resolute. The representative nodded earnestly. "We completely agree. This has been a significant lesson for us, and we are committed to implementing the necessary changes, including new mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff." Lauren offered a small smile. "I'll be closely monitoring the progress. I hope your airline lives up to its promises," she said firmly. Jessica left the airport in silence. She sat in the back of a taxi, her head bowed, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe that in just a few hours, the career she had spent over a decade building was now hanging by a thread. The captain's words, Mark Evans's warnings, and Lauren's calm yet piercing gaze echoed in her mind. Jessica realized that her actions weren't just a simple mistake. They were rooted in biases she hadn't even been aware she carried. In the days that followed, Jessica received official notification that she was required to attend mandatory training on bias awareness and cultural sensitivity. She knew that this wasn't just a workplace obligation. It was an opportunity to learn, reflect, and make amends. Jessica resolved to confront her prejudices, knowing that the path forward required accountability and a commitment to change. A few weeks later, Lauren received an email from the airline outlining the changes that had been implemented. The message detailed new training programs for staff and updated policies aimed at combating discrimination within the organization. Reading through the email, Lauren couldn't help but smile, feeling a sense of fulfillment that her experience had not been in vain. Lauren understood that the fight against injustice was rarely simple or swift, but she also believed that even the smallest actions could lead to significant change. Closing her laptop, she gathered her materials and prepared for her next conference, ready to continue spreading her message of equity and equality. Her resolve was stronger than ever, knowing that every step taken toward fairness was a step closer to a better, more inclusive world.